Okay, so we are recording. The agenda is there in the invite. So is Jeremy here? Yeah. So Jeremy, do you want to talk about your point first? Because it's obviously more relevant because we should start at the problem and not jump to solutions. So why don't you start and then we
Yeah,
can jump into solutions.
yeah. Thanks, Victor. Maybe this is my bad and my confusion on what the purpose of this meeting was. I didn't know if we were going to be more tactical or more general. But for me, the title of this was products data needs, and I'm still a little bit confused in terms of the problems that we need to solve with our how we approach data at GitLab. The basic place where I think that we want to get to is product as an org wants to be able to test ideas with data before we actually just write it down in an issue, let alone design and ship something, be able to measure stuff easily. When we ship something, we're able to add instrumentation to it really easily and really frictionlessly, so we don't have to fight that. And then three, be able to follow outcomes. So we ship something, we understand what the outcomes of that thing is. So I guess my question is do we feel like we're able to do that with the current setup we have, which is we have usage ping and we have snowplow on self-managed and .com respectively. We have that all go to a data warehouse, and then we're able to explore that and visualize that now with Periscope. So is that going well? Is our current approach solving those product needs that I kind of talked about it? Do we need to make radical changes to that approach, or do we need to just kind of make tweaks to the approach that we already have? And that's kind of the thing that I'm really curious about.
And I'll add the caveat to that, Jeremy, of the specifics around the snowplow implementation, that we are not tracking individual user data right now because it's still on shared infrastructure. And so we've limited what we're tracking, which has been a point of frustration for some of the product managers in the past. And we need that to move forward if we want to actually be tracking everything on .com.
You're totally right, and I'm curious. So that would solve the problem of the data that we already have. It's not specific enough and doesn't allow us to answer the questions that we want to answer. I don't even is that the problem that we're grappling with? I'd be curious to know from the product managers in this meeting, how have you used data as a product manager? Have you been frustrated with our tools and just stopped there and just said screw it, I don't know how to use this? Or have you gone past that, actually tried to write queries and then been unimpressed with the data? Because if that's the case, then maybe the snowplow fidelity, we can ramp that up and try to solve that. But if it's more the former, then we wouldn't be able to fix that with snowplow improvements. So maybe we can start there, which is product managers. How have you used data at GitLab? Have you actually tried using the data that we have available to us? If so, how have you used it, and has it been able to answer the questions you've had?
I could jump in. I have a specific example where it has been useful. So with the usage ping data, I broadly don't like the concept because I don't think it's specifically useful of just counting objects. So that's why I put in monthly active users, for example, just for reporting purposes. So I think that's a good direction. But my specific example is that we designed a feature to have multiple epics in a tree view. And so the team was very concerned that we shouldn't allow folks to have just an infinite number of epics. So similar to groups and subgroups, I think the max is 20. And so when we did sub epics, we said should we also have a limit? And so we said, let's put a limit. And then if there are people that want more than that, then we can also always relax this constraint, but we can't do the opposite because that would be terrible. So we purposely set the limit to 5, and then we tracked the data to say, are people actually going to up to 5? And it turns out the data indicates that people are using 1 or 2 at most, and maybe sometimes 3 levels, but not going much more beyond that. So that was a very specific usage of the usage ping that was helpful. But that's definitely not the norm. Most of the time, it is not driving product decisions as I want it to be.
Personally, I found problematic looking at usage ping data. I have some for security features, but the problem is that it's very, very high level. So we just count jobs, for example, for SaaS and that's dependency scanning. That's something, but that's probably not giving us the idea how users are using those features. And we mainly know that also Auto DevOps was running a lot of those pipelines automatically. So it's not really an idea how much users are involved with our features. What I found very, very useful, even if I cannot collect data, but that's a different story, is a snowplow. Because mainly I want to know how much users click on a specific button or expand the merge request security panel. And that's what I really need to know. So I don't care how much data is produced at the beginning, but how much data is consumed at the end. Unfortunately, Snowplow is available only for GitLab.com, as far as I know. Otherwise, you'll make me happy. But I know that there is some plan to do sort of Snowplow data for on-prem. And security features mainly are used by Ultimate customers, and they have on-prem or self-managed, that's the correct term, installations. So I can get data from GitLab.com, but that's not really our use case, our standard customer that we want to monitor. On GitLab.com, we have also public projects that can use Ultimate features for free, but that's not the target we want to use. Not the only target, that one of the targets, but most important one, obviously, are Ultimate customers. So I'm really a little stuck in this area where I cannot get data from the source I need, that is the self-managed.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. What I'm hearing from Victor is that when the data you want is available, it is useful in driving your decision making. But what I'm hearing from Fabio is that there's still frustration about getting the data that you need to make those decisions. And in your specific case with the secure features, it just so happens that the customers that are most valuable to you are not being tracked by Snowplow, and the structure of the usage ping, which I think we're all familiar with as just a infinite counter, makes it hard to make that really useful. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So let's say data from Snowplow from self-managed would be awesome, and will help a lot to understand if features are useful and which is the direction we should take, or if you're doing something wrong or something useless.
I think, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is a path in which once we move Snowplow to our own infrastructure, it can be added to on-prem installations. Isn't that correct?
There is, but I would imagine that it would be very, very, very hard to get instances to opt into it, because it would just there would be a ton of data, like that we would be hitting the hammering the collection endpoint. It'd be very easy for someone to turn that off. I think that so we can definitely try that. There's definitely an ability for us to maybe add that in as if you turn on usage ping, you kind of also opt into sending us some Snowplow data. I don't know if there's opportunities for us to either batch that or summarize that data, so we're not hammering our endpoint and sending traffic and being making it very easy for someone to turn that off. But I think it was really interesting for me to hear from Fabio the types of information that are really useful, because I agree. For me, usage ping is just so high level that we've tried to anonymize, to nerf it to a state where it's digestible for users, but it's not really working for the product team either. We're not getting nearly as much out of that as we need to. It's totally possible for us to increase the fidelity of the usage data, and so every day we're summarizing the stuff that people are clicking on, and we're sending that on a daily basis, to GitLab, for instance, and sending just a lot more data, anonymized data. But we just need to create the vision for that and then to ship that improvement.
Yeah, so as far as I understand, it's not possible to have on-prem, so self-managed Snowplow infrastructure, so they will still use our own infrastructure to send data to. So that's probably a blocker for this to happen. Is there any way that we can implement something in the product that is Snowplow-like but very, very light, that will allow to count at least have page counts and make this part of the usage ping without using the full Snowplow infrastructure that I suppose is quite complex and heavy to run self-managed?
I don't see why not. I don't know why we couldn't create a new table, and then every time someone clicks a button, we increment, we send that event and store that in the table, and then summarize that usage statistics table or whatever every day, and then so run a job, sum that information up into like a blob, and then send it off to GitLab. I don't know why we couldn't do that.
I don't think there's no
I
technical aspect.
I do want to caution though the idea of like, let's track this one way for on-prem or self-managed customers, and let's track this another way for SaaS customers. That what you're then going to, right, once we track that way, the next question is going to be, let's make an analysis that's going to put these customers next to each other. And what we're going to find is there are inconsistencies in the data or incongruencies that's going to make, we're going to be in this position again. So I want to push back on that idea.
I'll push back, Emily, on your pushback. So there's a couple of things there. Like, I think we need to do what we can now. So there's the iteration point with on-prem. I think it's a tall order to do the technical solutions, because I would see just from like open source and getting opt-in and people agreeing to that. I think it's pretty risky. I think we may have had similar discussions in the past. So the way I see it is, in the short term, it would be pretty unlikely to get front-end data from on-prem. And so I wouldn't want to optimize need to do that. And then so if you get front-end data from .com, it will be like a Redshift style thing or a streaming thing, and it wouldn't be the on-prem solution. And I think that's okay, because I see the on-prem solution being so far away. And then to address Fabio's point, the data would be different, to address your point, Emily, as well. From a business perspective, the customers are different from both places. But I think that's just what we have to work with. We have two lines of business right now, .com and self-hosted. And .com, there's less customers, it's less representative. And so I would, as a product manager, use that data to do like the UI interactions. I think that would be a pretty good thing to use from a product perspective to drive a feature. And then I would rely on the on-prem data to drive, to understand adoption more widely and driving real dollars and cents decisions. But from like is this a good button? Was this a good design? Is it very discoverable? That I could rely on .com, because there's enough users there statistically to be comfortable for us to make that decision. So I would separate it that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also, I'm just thinking about that. One of the problems, and that's what I'm saying before, we have an implementation problem, because unfortunately, a lot of logic is now in the front end for the security features. And that's a problem, obviously, because it's very hard to collect any usage ping more than the number of jobs for a bunch of things. We are working, and the plan is to move a lot of this logic and code in the backend. Probably at that point, it would be easier to create objects and counters that can be introduced, can be added to the usage ping data. So at that point, you can count how many times an endpoint that creates, diff report in the merge request widget is called. And so we have the information that we need without using Snowplow, but using the backend thing. I have this problem now, but is a shared responsibility. I'm not saying it because of only the usage ping infrastructure. It's also because how we implemented our features.
I was going to make a point that I agree with your points, Victor. I do think that as GitLab.com continues to grow, like our paid users continue to go up and to the right, like that will increase in the quality of the data. Yes, I understand. Like most secure customers are like on Ultimate and they're on self-managed. That will that user base will grow in quality, and we'll be able to get more and more insights from like paid usage, like from that user base.
Right.
Number two,
so that's only good. That's only I think that doesn't. It supports my point in a way. I think it reaffirms Emily's point that we shouldn't have two separate things. But I think please continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious to know if there's anyone in this call, like this has to be a solved problem. Like we're not the first self-managed product with like usage statistics in it, and I'm curious to know.
That's a great point.
I'll take that as an action point. I will investigate.
Do research. Okay.
I will tap into my networks and see what other people are doing, and I will circle back and update with that info.
How does Jira Server do this? I mean, they've been pushing cloud recently, but they've made their business on self-hosted, as with many enterprise apps. So that's a great question, Jared.
Yeah, 100%.
One of the heads of PM for data analytics is here in Sydney. I know him. I'll try and have coffee with him and ask him.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Thanks, everyone. That's great.
Sorry, just
sorry.
I just want to answer Luca's question in chat. So they're asking, which is the
Luca, why don't you verbalize it? Why don't you verbalize it first for the benefit of the video?
Oh yeah, we're recording.
Oh yeah, I forgot we were recording. I said I think we're trying to put the cart before the horse. I think it would be a good step to at least in product start thinking about the kind of questions that we want to ask of the data. Like, if it doesn't matter if it doesn't exist, like what is it that you want to ask of, like, Fabio? What in the secure stage, like what are the things that you want to know from the features that you're implementing and how people are using it, like, and work backwards from there. Like, what is an ideal dashboard look to you? What kind of reports do you want to see? Like, we're trying to think about like very kind of detailed things right now, and I think we need to kind of take a step back, I think, and start thinking about like what is it that we actually want to get out of this data, what we can already.
Yeah, the answer for me is quite quick and simple. First of all, I want to know adoption, how adoption is going, and if this is increasing or not. For example, if I create a new tab in the security dashboard, I want to know if users are using that specific tab. If I introduce the merge request widget for security features in the merge request, I want to know if users are expanding it in order to see details, in order to understand if I'm putting some code and putting some elements that people need and they're using, or just something, nice to look at, but nobody is really digging into that.
Yeah, so that kind of stuff is really helpful to know, and I think we need to get an idea of that from each product manager. Emily,
it is helpful, but these are not conversations that need to happen sequentially. They're conversations that need to happen in tandem. So like in terms of what is your ideal state of the product team being data driven or being data informed? Like that is definitely one conversation that needs to happen. Another conversation that needs to happen is, given the existing constraints, how can the data team help product achieve its goals, right? And so not only that, but we have to educate you as product managers on how to ask the best questions and how to formulate those questions. So Fabio, is it okay if I use your adoption example?
Oh, sorry?
Is it okay if I use your example that you just gave?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, yeah.
So in terms of expanding a security widget on an MR, right? What does that mean? Does that mean clicking? Does that mean you have to expand the widget and then do something else? Like, what does adoption mean? And so that way, when you're asking the question of, hey, is this new feature being adopted, everyone is on the same page. Right now, given the constraint of the usage ping, adoption is really just running the jobs. I built a dashboard for Fabio last week, and it really is just a count of jobs, and we do our best with the data we have to make it useful, understand what the average trends are, what the month-over-month growth are, but like we have to work within existing constraints. And so I don't disagree, Luca. Like, what does the organization look like? I think you linked the issue that Jeremy created yesterday. I think it's a great conversation to have, but we can't lose sight of, we can't favor that conversation of what does this look like, what should it look like, at the cost of losing the conversation of how do we work within existing constraints.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I completely agree with you. I think you articulated that the both kind of points that we need to be focusing on really well. So thank you.
So with that, I'd like to share. So one of the biggest frustrations that I've heard from where I sit on the data team is that, especially for PMs who are comfortable with SQL, but Looker was kind of a pain. Like, you couldn't just write a SQL query. You had to like do this thing and then build that file and then, moving into Periscope, that's not a requirement anymore. And when we went into our proof of concept and our product replacement search, we did take a lot of the feedback that we had gotten into that decision. For example, embedding into the handbook. Like if you wanted to put on your vision or direction page what your feature adoption looks like once we have adoption quantified, like you could embed that right into the handbook. We've also, so I have written, I'm going to share my screen real fast. So this is a secure metrics dashboard that I created loosely based off something that already existed in Looker. It still could use a lot of polishing, but just a TLDR of what you're looking at. There's a date range filter here. Pings data can be aggregated at the weekly or the monthly levels, and then quarterly and yearly, of course. And if you change the aggregation, it does reflect the data. Now, there are some problems with the pings data itself. When we look at it on a weekly level, you can see things like, clearly here we didn't get any pings for these features. Clearly here we didn't get all the pings. We know that pings is always up and to the right. So when we see these gaps, we know that there's gaps in the data. We're working on how to identify that a little bit better on the data team, but right now, like this is how you can tell that. And then you can see things like rolling average, weekly growth, etc. If we go back to the monthly level, the one thing I want to highlight, so, and we mentioned this in the handbook, but one, people can request SQL access to Periscope, and I've created a function here, one function, feature usage, this aggregation period, and growth, that's going to allow you to, and all you have to do is add your feature's name from the usage ping, and it's going to allow you to build this whole dashboard. Everything you see on this dashboard is built off that one line for each feature. I see chats coming in. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can find the chat. Okay, yeah, sorry. But so we are working, like, from my side, I'm definitely trying to make it easier for you to get the data you're interested in. And I brought that up because I want to pose the question of, is this close enough to easy, or what are the hurdles that you still see?
I don't, to be honest, I haven't spent much time in Periscope, so I don't know how easy it is to like fork that dashboard and then to make one for my own for manage. But I love the example. Like, I love having an example to be able to riff off of. But I don't know how challenging it is in Periscope since I haven't done it. I had opinions about Looker, but none of those are relevant anymore. So.
So that's a question. I'll make sure to make an action item, and we can follow up in a month with that specific question.
Cool. Is there any training or documentation that's planned for Periscope to teach the product team on how to use it?
Training is coming. So I announced this today. Training is coming. We will announce the training when we have it. There is documentation. I will drop the link in the agenda. And you can run from there. It is pretty intuitive, but it's worth spending the 20 minutes to watch the onboarding video to scratch your head a little bit less down the road.
Cool. That's awesome. So we have an action item there to kind of dive into Periscope a little bit. What are the next steps kind of like on the data collection side in terms of like the new version of usage ping? Was it to kind of create like the secure kind of mock dashboard in terms of like the things that we wanted to kind of capture, and then to kind of like consider a product kind of path that allows us to get there? Did I get that right?
So one of the things that has worked really well for me in the past is just having an instrumentation sheet of the kind of questions that you'd like to answer, and then having the events that you would need to be able to answer those questions. And that gives you a visualization of clearly there will be some things that are not technically feasible for implementation, and you would mark those as not able to implement. And that gives you the gaps that you don't have. Sometimes the data that you don't have is as important as the data that you do, and able to, in order to make those decisions. And from there kind of determine what the next iteration of pings is. Because if you start from kind of like the mock dashboard perspective, you might lose sense of the things that are not implementable later down the line. And again, back to Emily's point about having like discrepancies between how we track in .com versus how we track in pings. If we can keep pings to account base, obviously that's ideal. One of the questions that I had in terms of refactoring pings, has there any analysis been done in the past? I'm sorry, maybe it has, on how different GitLab.com versus self-managed users are, because the question remains of how important in terms of product decisions is self-managed. Could you make all your decisions on GitLab.com and then take it from there?
No. Self-managed customers and our user base there is very different from .com at the moment. The vast majority of our business comes from self-managed, so it's very important at the moment for us to understand self-managed at a very detailed level, more than .com. .com, obviously, we control that instance, and we can send whatever information that we want to back to GitLab Inc. So our fidelity of the amount of data we can capture, we have more leeway there. For self-managed, we're reliant on these self-managed instances to send data voluntarily back to GitLab Inc. So,
Right.
But if I could wave a magic wand, I would love to have perfect knowledge over self-managed right now today.
Jeremy, I have to agree and disagree at the same time with you. Let's say, so for me, and specifically for secure, as you already know, .com is not really useful. So it's very, very useful to have on-prem. But I also feel that, from GitLab.com, we can get, new trends and people that want to experiment things. So maybe, and it's very hard to get and I'm talking about the stages that have a lot of, community live facing features. It's not so easy to get feedback from individual contributors or open source projects, while it is way easier to get it from on self-managed customers. For example, for Ultimate, you may have 5 customers that you can ping regularly, and you can get a lot of feedback from there. And they are covering a lot from the self-hosted, from the self-managed instances. While on GitLab.com, there are a million of individual contributors who cannot ping, you cannot get in contact. They have no time, no interest, no knowledge that you want to get some information from there. So I see a value now in .com on this specific task, even if I agree that obviously self-managed are the core, that they are giving us the idea how to increase our revenues. That's, in pragmatic words, what they can give us.
Oh,
Thank you.
totally. I want it all.
We've got 1 minute. Can I just jump in real quick? I'm curious how much support product you are looking for around the data collection question. It seems like we can be really helpful for the what data we want to answer standpoint. I think we've got our own takeaways on our side, but in terms of supporting the how do we want to collect this data both on-prem and .com, would you like us to go through that with you? Would you like us to help drive that? What would be helpful for you?
I mean, to solve like the data collection problem, I think it has to be driven by product's needs, and to a certain extent, like the who owns the team the stage that owns those areas, which right now is telemetry, which is fulfillment. So I think that I don't care who drives it. I think that ultimately, like especially for something like self-managed usage ping, it's going to require product changes in order for us to be able to add in the type of insights and data that we want in order to get to that level of insight that we want. So I think it has to be kind of driven a little bit by product, but I don't care. Like if there's room for your team to kind of help out with the product changes or the lifting in order to make that happen, I'm like all for it.
Okay.
But I guess I would leave that up to maybe Luca to kind of drive and help define, and then we can kind of see how we can accelerate that plan.
So will the infrastructure for Snowplow fall under fulfillment and telemetry?
So there's the infrastructure. Let me jump on that piece real quick. We ran out of time, so I wasn't going to get to it. But there's a takeaway on the data team side, which is it's sort of already obvious, but there's a big paradigm shift coming in terms of where the bulk of our data and where the bulk of our data needs are coming from, and it's about to shift heavily to product, sort of according to these conversations. And so we need to take a step back and say, all right, are we optimizing this right? Because we've optimized for SaaS cloud solutions. Cool. The story's gotten bigger. And so we need to explore this. I don't necessarily want to say like we're not going to block anything, like no alignment traps here, but I need to look out and say, okay, where do we need to be in 12 months to make sure that we're doing sort of the right thing and the efficient thing as an organization.
I guess, Walter, from like a resourcing standpoint, like from a people staffing standpoint, there's definitely an opportunity to dedicate like some attention here. Like on the snow, like Emily opened the conversation by saying snowplow, we need to migrate the infrastructure. This has been something we've known about for about 8 months, and we've just been really, really challenged to make time for it because the infrastructure team is just working on a lot of really other important projects. Right now, they're focused on .com cloud spend. Very important problem that needs to be solved. But that being said, like our shared infrastructure agreement is expiring in 3 months or so, at which point we're gonna have to spend another year of money in order to like keep that going, and we'll have no progress made on like our data model and our data needs. So how do we solve that logjam problem? Well, we can certainly solve it with a dedicated people.
Got it. That 3-month timeline is a little concerning. Who's the right person in infrastructure to loop into a conversation there?
Let's take that offline.
Cool.
Also, just for a little bit more context so you understand the scope, I think we're talking about $12K a month for 12 months is what we'd be at for renewal if .com doesn't grow. So as we collect more and the scale of the data grows, that cost will go up.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to quickly answer Emily's question about where the responsibility for the infrastructure will land, I don't think it's fulfillment at this point. I think it will stay with the data team. That may change. I don't know. But as for the foreseeable future, I think it will still stay with you. But if that's something
it's not with us now.
Huh?
It's not with us now.
Oh, it's not? So who handles that right now?
The infrastructure. Well, we collect the data from the infrastructure where it's being hosted. But I'm talking about hosting the infrastructure. But from what Jeremy said, it sounds like that's going to come from the infrastructure team.
Got it.
That's
cool.
the block right now. Yeah.
Awesome.
But back just to make
thanks for the conversation, everyone. I'm going to head out, but
yeah.
Please continue.
I have to drop too.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I YouTube this
Can you send me the video to watch?
before I YouTube it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Can I have the video as well?
I'll put it on our Google Drive thingy.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, not a problem. All right, bye everyone.
Bye-bye.